Hi guys. Okay. Um, so our article of the week this week is this one right here. Is Nuclear Armageddon More Likely Than Ever? Our literacy skill of this week is read with a purpose. Okay. So this one is going to be a little bit different than how we usually do things, but there's some really good skills here that you can apply to your reading. So if you'll see the poster at the front of the classroom where it says read with a purpose, there's 4 things that we're going to do when we read with a purpose. We're going to preview, predict, paraphrase, and plan. Okay, so what it means when you read with a purpose is you have a reason for reading what you're reading. Okay, when we're reading in the beginning of class, the first 30 minutes, your purpose might be to zone out and be entertained, or to just, get into the story. It also might be to finish your assignments so you can graduate, okay? You always have a purpose every time you read, whether or not you're aware of what your purpose is. When you're texting, you're reading the text, and your purpose is to communicate with your friends, to make plans, to whatever. When we're reading more academic texts, we need to think more about that purpose, and that's going to help us understand the article better. Okay, so the first thing we do when we read with a purpose is we preview. Okay, so you'll take your article and you just kind of look over it, see if there's text features or subheadings, subtitles, things like that. And just kind of to give us a sense of what's going to be happening in this article. So I see that it's about a nuclear Armageddon, and I'm going to look at the subtitles. How many nuclear weapons are there? What's the biggest worry? What are other powers doing? Why is that? Could terrorists acquire a nuke? Is a nuke-free world possible? Monitoring nuclear wannabes. Okay, I see that this talks a lot about different countries like North Korea. It also mentions Pakistan, Israel, Syria, the United States, Russia, China. So this is going to be talking about nuclear war and nuclear weapons on a global level. And I see that it's going to kind of give me an overview of nuclear weapons and what people are worried about. So, see, I'm previewing it to kind of get a sense of what I'm going to read, so I'm not just jumping in and well, who knows what this is going to be about. Okay, so I'm using those things on the article that are already there to help me kind of start to understand before I even start reading. Then I'm going to predict, okay, and so I don't have a lot of predictions here, except that I'm seeing that it's going to tell me more about how countries are involved, and maybe the title is a question, is nuclear Armageddon more likely than ever? So I predict that it will kind of tell me maybe what the risk of nuclear war is. So I'm just kind of prepping my mind to read this article, because now I'm ready. I have more of a purpose because I know what to look for. I know what's coming. Okay, and that's going to help me better understand the article as I start reading it. So this time, and this is what's going to be a little different, is I'm just going to read the article straight through. I'm not going to stop and ask questions. I'm not going to annotate when I read through the first time. I'm just going to read it through to just get a general idea of what the article is about, and that will help me to then paraphrase, which is our third step. Okay, so I'm just going to read this article straight through. Is nuclear Armageddon more likely than ever? February 27th, 2016. New weapons, unstable nations, and terrorism are raising the nuclear stakes. Is a doomsday attack more likely? Here's everything you need to know about the new nuclear arms race. How many nuclear weapons are there? About 16,000. Russia and the U.S. have 93% of them, with more than 7,000 each. The rest are split between France, China, the UK, Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea. The global stockpile is much smaller than it was at the height of the Cold War. In 1986, Russia and the US had 64,000 nukes pointed at each other, enough to devastate every square inch of the entire globe. But there are growing fears that nuclear catastrophe is becoming increasingly likely. The established nuclear powers are modernizing their arsenals with smaller, more sophisticated weapons. The unstable regime in nuclear armed North Korea is trying to develop a hydrogen bomb. ISIS, which is richer and more ambitious than any previous terrorist group, is trying to get hold of a nuclear device. The doomsday clock, the symbolic countdown to Armageddon, was last year moved from 5 minutes to midnight to 3 minutes. We are facing nuclear dangers today that are in fact more likely to erupt into a nuclear conflict than during the Cold War, says former Secretary of Defense William Perry. What's the biggest worry? Probably North Korea, since it's run by the erratic, belligerent dictator Kim Jong-un. The Hermit Kingdom carried out its fourth nuclear test in January and claimed it was a hydrogen bomb. Atomic bombs create their explosive energy solely through nuclear fission, while H-bombs rely on nuclear fusion, the same chain reaction that drives the sun. This makes them vastly more powerful than atomic bombs. A-bombs tend to be measured in kilotons, equivalent to 1,000 tons of TNT. H-bombs in megatons, 1 million tons of TNT. Nuclear scientists are unconvinced that North Korea's underground test was a thermonuclear weapon based on the shock waves it produced. But the country is believed to have a 10 kiloton atomic weapon, slightly smaller than the Hiroshima bomb, but enough to destroy a city. The regime already has the capability to strike South Korea, Japan, and other nearby countries with nuclear weapons. Its recent launch of a satellite into orbit, which was widely seen as an intercontinental ballistic missile test, suggested that it could soon reach the U.S. What are other powers doing? Arming up. Russia's defense budget has increased by over 50% since 2007. A third of it is devoted to nuclear weapons. China is increasing its warhead stocks and developing a nuclear-armed submarines. Pakistan and India's own nuclear standoff shows no sign of cooling. President Obama, who in 2009 pledged to try to create a world without nuclear weapons, has proposed spending $1 trillion over the next 30 years updating America's nuclear arsenal, replacing 12 nuclear-armed submarines, 450 land-based missiles, and hundreds of nuclear bombers. Some of the weapons in development are very controversial. See, I'm even tired. I'm tired no matter where I am, class or otherwise. Why is that? They're becoming smaller and more advanced and thus more likely to be used. Last fall, the U.S. Air Force tested its first precision-guided atom bomb, which can be remotely guided like a cruise missile to zero in on small targets. Its explosive power can be dialed up or down from 50 kilotons to 0.3 kilotons. Critics argue that nuclear weapons should never be used as battlefield weapons, only as a deterrent. What going smaller does, says retired General James Cartwright, is make the weapons more thinkable. Russia's new weapons are also causing concerns. Last November, the Kremlin leaked plans for a nuclear torpedo designed to sneak under traditional nuclear defenses and hit cities or military installations along the coasts. Could terrorists acquire a nuke? It's possible. Between 1995 and 2012, the International Atomic Energy Agency cataloged 2,200 attempts to steal or smuggle uranium. ISIS's propaganda machine has suggested buying a nuclear weapon in Pakistan and smuggling it into the U.S. Nuclear experts warn that an improvised device could be fitted into an SUV-sized shipping container. Ports and airports are fitted with radiation sensors, but they only work at very close range. Another potential threat is a dirty bomb, a regular explosive device that could spray radioactive material over a blast zone, exposing thousands of people to radiation and turning an entire city into an uninhabitable ghost town. Authorities in Iraq are now searching for a sizable quantity of highly dangerous radioactive material stolen last year, which theoretically could wind up in the hands of ISIS. Is a nuke-free world possible? Not in the foreseeable future. Once rogue nations develop nuclear weapons, they're extremely unlikely to relinquish them. The reason you attacked Afghanistan is because they don't have nukes, a North Korean diplomat told American negotiators in 2005. That is why we will never give up ours. For similar reasons, none of the 9 nuclear powers will surrender its weapons. The nuclear genie was let out of the bottle in Hiroshima in 1945, and it will probably never be forced back in. Monitoring nuclear wannabes. Any nation seeking to develop nuclear weapons has to test them, and the good news is that it has become impossible to conduct a nuclear test in secret. With a huge network of seismic stations and underwater hydroacoustic centers, the international organization responsible for enforcing the ban on testing can detect and measure a nuclear explosion anywhere in the world. But uncovering the construction of a nuke is another matter. Satellites play a big part, but they're far from infallible. Syria hid a nuclear reactor by assembling it in a building with a lowered floor, which from the outside looked too small to house such a facility. The reactor was discovered and destroyed by Israel in 2007 before it could be completed. Once a program has been detected, advances in nuclear forensics, the analysis of air and soil for radioactive particles, have made it very hard to cover up previous activity. You can detect individual atoms, says Andreas Persbo of Vertic, the International Agreement Verification think tank. It's virtually impossible to hide that you've been doing nuclear activity in a room. Okay, that was a lot all at once. I felt myself wanting to go back into old patterns of like making comments and pointing things out, but Read with a Purpose, we just read straight through, okay? And now we're going to paraphrase what we read, and I'm just going to take the easy way out this time and use the subheadings, the subtitles. Okay, as we learned with monitor comprehension a couple weeks ago, that's a really good way to paraphrase, is to use those text features like subtitles, okay? So I know that this paragraph is about how many nuclear weapons exist. I know that this paragraph is about what is the biggest worry. This paragraph is about what other countries are doing, and then why. And then this is about terrorists. This one is about, is it possible to not have nuclear weapons? And then this one is kind of like monitoring nuclear behavior or experiments, okay? So those subtitles really come in handy in helping me paraphrase the article. And now we're going to do the final P of Read with a Purpose, which is plan. So now that you've read through the article, you know what it's about, you can kind of paraphrase it, you've kind of got a feel for things, you want to make a plan of one thing to focus on, okay? So at this point, if I were thinking, well, my purpose is to be able to write a one-page response to this article, then I would think about, well, now that I know what the article is about, what might I want to write about? The possible response questions are, the article identifies North Korea as our biggest worry. What should the U.S. do about North Korea? And then it says to read more about it online before answering. To be honest, that's probably not what I would do. Because I don't want to have to read more online. I'm just going to be honest. Then pick a passage from the article and respond to it. So, okay, these possible response questions don't give us a lot to work with. One thing that I was noticing is when I was reading the very first paragraph about how many nuclear weapons are there, is just how much I don't know about nuclear weapons and things like that. And I felt like I had a lot of comments to make. So I might choose that, like choosing that paragraph there to respond on. And then I would really focus all my annotations and my concentration on that paragraph. Another thing I could do is if I wanted to think about like the relationship between countries, and I could focus just on that. There's so many things you could focus on in this article, and that's why Reading with a Purpose is helping you narrow it down so that you can understand one part of it really well instead of just like kind of barely understanding the whole thing altogether. So think about what you want to do with the article. What do you want to write your response about? Um, Maybe where did you ask the most questions in your brain as you were reading? Or where did you feel like you had the most to say? Maybe we'll focus on that. So I'm going to just go through the first paragraph, okay, and I'm going to just annotate this paragraph like crazy, okay, because that's my plan. My plan is to write a response based on this paragraph. So I'm going to annotate this paragraph. If your plan is something else, to write your response on, like international relations or the science behind it or whatever, you can focus your annotations on that thing. So I want you to make a note at the top of your article of what your plan is. Like, my plan is to write a response about the first paragraph, or my plan is to write a response about the relations between different countries, or my plan is to write about how things have changed since the Cold War. Think about what you want to write your response on, and then make a plan to focus on that now as you reread the article. Okay, so because I'm going to base mine on the first paragraph, I only need to reread the first paragraph. Okay, rereading is always part of Read with the Purpose, because you read it the first time just to understand the basics, then you make a plan to refocus on something specific, and you reread at least that part, if not the whole thing. So I'm going to go through the first paragraph and annotate it. I'm going to share some of my annotations with you. So, how many nuclear weapons are there? I might put my guess here, and I mean, now I've already read it, so I know. But I think before I read this article, I would guess, I don't know, I feel like I would have guessed like 100, or like a few hundred, maybe in the hundreds. So I just made a note. I just put an annotation there that's what I thought. It says about 16,000. So I'm going to highlight that, and even just put like some exclamation points in the margin, just because like that's so many. That's so many more than I thought there were. So Russia and the U.S. have 93% of them. I'm going to highlight that part too, because that also was really surprising to me. I could do some quick math if I wanted to find out about how many that means Russia and the U.S. have. And then it says they have more than 7,000 each. 7,000 nuclear weapons, guys. That's so many. The rest are split between France, China, the UK, and Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea. Okay, so I'm going to just make a note of, like, this is who has them. And I'm underlining that. France, China, the UK, Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea. The global stockpile is much smaller than it was at the height of the Cold War. So I'm going to ask, where did the weapons go? Right. So if there are fewer now, the stockpile is smaller. Where did those nuclear weapons go? I'll admit I don't know a lot about like getting rid of nuclear weapons. 1986, Russia and the U.S. had 64,000 nukes pointed at each other. Okay, that's significant. That's a lot less. So I'd probably do a little math to see like how many. I circled 64,000 nukes. Probably should have highlighted it, but pointed at each other. That's just the U.S. and Russia, and that's during the height of the Cold War. So let me go back and highlight those two things. Okay. Enough to devastate every square inch of the entire globe. I'm going to just write in the margin, that's excessive. Like, right? That's too many. We don't need that many nuclear weapons. I mean, I have my opinions. You can have yours. So, but there are growing fears that nuclear catastrophe is becoming increasingly likely. I'm going to think, like, do I fear nuclear war? And that's something I just want to think about. Like, I think it's something that's on my radar. It's something I think about, but it's not something I like actively worry about. I know during the Cold War, um, like that's around the time I was born, was during the Cold War, and I know that people were constantly afraid of that, of nuclear war happening. Um, it was on their minds all the time. I think especially people in big cities. Um, and I think it's something I think about sometimes. Like if I when I read in the news, like about North Korea or whatever, it's something I think about. But it's not something I actively fear or actively think about. Um, okay, the established nuclear powers are modernizing their arsenals with smaller, more sophisticated weapons. So, are they making more? Are those the countries? It says the powers that the established nuclear powers. So that would be us and Russia, France, China, the UK, Pakistan, India, and Israel, and North Korea. Are they making more weapons? It says they're modernizing with smaller, more sophisticated weapons. The unstable regime in nuclear armed North Korea is trying to develop a hydrogen bomb. I'm going to highlight that because I learned that hydrogen bomb is a big deal. ISIS, which is richer and more ambitious than any previous terrorist group, is trying to get hold of a nuclear device. That scares me. I'm just going to write yikes in the margin. The doomsday clock. If you don't know what that is, circle it. Okay, if you've never heard of the doomsday clock. Okay, showing you my annotation so far. The symbolic countdown to Armageddon. So Armageddon is like the end of the world, right? So the doomsday clock is a symbolic countdown. So basically, like, how close do we think we are to like the world ending? Obviously, we don't know. That's why it's just a symbolic countdown. It's a symbol. It's not an actual clock. It's not an actual countdown. Was last year moved from 5 minutes to midnight to 3 minutes. So, like in the history of time and civilization, we thought, and midnight is Armageddon when the world ends. We thought we were at 11:55, which is really close if you think about, all of civilization. And then last year they said no, it's 11:57. So I'm just gonna write 11:57 in the margin. How did they determine that? What is I don't even really, I know how to explain it enough, but I don't know really like who decides that or what does it actually mean. So I just jotted down those questions. It says we're facing nuclear dangers today that are in fact more likely, highlighting more likely, to erupt into nuclear conflict than during the Cold War, says former Secretary of Defense William Perry. I don't recognize the name William Perry. I'm just going to circle it and say which president was he under. Like whose Secretary of Defense was he? Okay, so I've annotated that paragraph a ton, as you can see. Okay, that's what your, sorry guys, I can't do it backwards. That's what your focus should look like. Okay, is having a ton of annotations on a focused topic of the article. Okay, this helps me now as I go to write my response because I see what I have to say about these things. And as I was thinking and I realized like, oh, I spent a lot of time thinking about like, do I fear nuclear war? And so that kind of pointed out to me that I might have the most to say about that. So that might be something that I focus on or start with in my response is, do I fear nuclear war? Do I think that it's imminent? Do I think it's going to happen soon? Maybe my understanding or lack of understanding about the doomsday clock or how surprised I was to learn how many nuclear weapons there are. I'm going to just focus, I'm going to use my annotations to help me focus my response so that I have more to say, because I know a lot of the things I hear from you guys are like, well, I don't know what to say in my response. Like, well, do I just write a summary? No, you're not writing a summary. You're telling me your thoughts, telling me your feelings, your opinions, what was new for you. Maybe it's something that you already think a lot about. So use those annotations to help you write your response. And then make sure that your annotations of this article are focused on a plan to help you write your response. Okay? The last question you're going to ask when you read with a purpose, well, it should be on your mind as you're reading, is what is the author's purpose? Okay? So the person who's writing this, their purpose could be to inform you, to entertain you, or to persuade you. So if we think about, is the point to entertain us? Not with something like this. This isn't funny, right? This is actually pretty serious and freaky. Okay, so it's not to entertain us. Are they trying to persuade us of something? Do they have a position, an opinion that they're trying to get us to feel the same way they do? I don't see any evidence to suggest that. I think that the author's purpose in this article is to inform us. They're giving us facts, dates, and information so that we can understand the topic. So this is an informational article. It's not persuasion or opinion, and it's not to entertain. So the author's purpose of this article is to inform. Okay? That's kind of how you figure out what the author's purpose is. What are they trying to do here? Convince you, entertain you, or inform you. Okay? So jot that down. And then go ahead and annotate to your heart's content about what your plan is, what your focus is on this article. Okay, guys. Thanks. Bye.